Welcome back to the show, everybody. It's called the Business to Business Network Show. My name is Rex Perry. If you just happen to be turning on your radio, we talk business, politics, economics here in the Valley of the Sun. Our next guest is Marci. Marci, give us your last name. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Marci Keckler, Vice President of Financial Advice Strategy at Ameriprise Financial.
And you've been doing a very interesting research into risk-adverse investors. Tell us a little bit about the research you've been doing.
We wanted to understand how are American investors feeling about financial risk. We know there's been market volatility recently, and people remember 2008 and 2009 as well. So how are people feeling about risk? And what we learned is nearly 3 out of 4 say they are cautious. They are either somewhat or very cautious about financial risk.
And you've kind of broken it down into like a phase 1, 2, 3, 4. Tell us a little bit about the breakout that you put together.
Yeah, we learned investors really kind of fell into one of 4 profiles along a spectrum of comfort with risk. And the most cautious end of the spectrum are risk avoiders, people who really want to play it safe. And that's about 30% of the population. So, it's a good-sized number of people. The next step up on the spectrum, people a little more comfortable, they're still cautious, are people we call risk mitigators. They've taken a few more steps to manage risk in their financial lives, and they feel a little more comfortable, but they're still quite cautious. Putting those 2 groups together is where we get 3 out of 4 people. So that's really the cautious side. As we continue up the spectrum, there are people who are risk managers. They're more in the driver's seat. They've done even more to manage risk. And then there's a really small group at the far end of the spectrum who we call risk embracers or risk optimizers. And that group, for them, risk is about opportunity and excitement. So they like it and they think it's interesting. Most people are not in that category. But that's really what the profiles looked like. And, we looked across generations to say, does your age or your life stage affect it? We also looked between men and women. And there are some interesting differences that emerged there.
Yeah, tell us about those.
So we asked baby boomers, how they feel about risk. We asked Generation X, that's my generation. And we also asked millennials, really the youngest investors we talked to. And what we saw was there were people at all life stages, at all spots on the spectrum. So your age doesn't determine it. But baby boomers were a little bit more likely to be in that risk avoider group, which makes sense. Retirement is sooner. They may already be retired, or retirement is really right on the horizon. So they have good reason to be maybe a little bit more likely to be cautious. We also saw millennials, the youngest people we talked to, were just a little bit more likely to be in that far kind of comfortable with risk end of the spectrum. About 4% of millennials, still a small group, but a little more than the total population. So some slight generational differences and some slight differences between men and women. Again, we saw men and women across the spectrum, but a few more women, more likely for women to be in that cautious end of the spectrum, and a few more men at the more comfortable end of the spectrum. So a little bit of gender difference, a little bit of generational difference, but those 2 things alone don't determine your comfort level with risk. It's really quite personal and individual.
And tell us about the dollars involved here. When you talk about investors and risk, what kind of money sizes are we talking about here?
What we learned is that how much money you have does not determine how you feel about risk. So we saw people almost regardless of the amount of money that they had who might be anywhere on the spectrum. So even, people who have what might feel like ample resources, they could be still pretty cautious. And people who are really just getting started and don't have a whole lot saved yet, they might be comfortable with risk or cautious either way. So we didn't see a real connection between amount of money or asset level and comfort with risk. They weren't too related.
And tell us about the coaching and education that you guys do. How do you help people understand, risk, and if they're super cautious, or educate us on our show here. What should we be coached about?
I think one thing to think about is risk isn't always bad. So the reason that you would take a risk is because there's a payoff or there's a possible upside. So I think about risk as really it's an uncertain outcome. You don't know exactly what's going to happen, but you would go forward anyway because you want the possible upside. So I think first thing to realize is taking risks in a balanced and measured way isn't necessarily a bad thing. And by thinking you're not taking any risk, you might be taking some you're not thinking about. So if you're completely out of the markets, all your money is in an asset that's not going to change in value. It's like a bank savings account or a CD. You're avoiding the risk of market downside, but you might find inflation is a risk that's sneaking up on you over time. So you might find in retirement you're not going to have the purchasing power because you didn't get enough growth in your investments along the way. So I think one lesson to understand is taking risk in a smart way can be a good thing, and it's not to be avoided at all costs. Another thing that we learned was around risk in other parts of your life than the markets, around having health insurance and life insurance were things that made a big difference too.
Yeah, and you guys do coaching on, if people want to get information, if they want to get some help, do you have websites? How do they get more information with you?
We do, and one of the key ways we work with people to help them with their financial situation is by looking at their whole plan together, having kind of a holistic look at all the parts of your financial life. So that's one of the key things we recommend, so that you and a financial professional you're working with, a financial advisor, kind of have a common view of what you're trying to do. If you want to learn more about how that works and what strategies you might consider, we do have more information at our website, amerprise.com. There you can find specifically this risk study at amerprise.com/financial risk study. But you can also find kind of an advisor search feature that you can put in information about who you are and what you're interested in. And you'll get some suggestions of people in your area that you might want to consider having a conversation with or interviewing. But regardless of that, it really does make a difference if people get informed and be diversified, and you can learn more at amerprise.com/financial risk study.
And spell Ameriprise for the audience.
AMERIPRISE.
.com.
Ameriprise.com.
And remember that I remember this from college economics. You have opportunity costs. If you are too restrained, you miss out on the return, and it may not be as risky as you thought. You got to get educated. Marci, we got to do a commercial break here. We got music coming up. It's time for our break at the bottom of the hour. Everybody stay tuned for the news. We're going to be right back.